Good morning. I apologize for the hustle and bustle. I remember reading in the New Testament, there's this passage where some people were getting onto Jesus for doing a good deed on the Sabbath day. And the problem in their eyes was, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day. And Jesus talked to them about the priests in the old law, and he said, Don't you know they work every Saturday? In fact, that's their busiest day of the week. It's their hardest day of the week. And he's talking about the fact that when those people are going to worship and get right with God, the priests are having to do all this stuff to kind of coordinate and facilitate and orchestrate. And that's in a very loose sense. That's kind of how I felt just now, having to see if I could get the computer reconnected. We had to end the meeting and create a new one, and hopefully things are better on the end of those who are watching online. But I do ask for your grace in the fact that things are a little different right now, and those are things you have to deal with in this technological world. The title of my lesson, I normally don't start that way. I know some, I've heard some preachers, it seems like every Sunday, that's how they start. The title of my sermon today, I typically try to stay away from that, but I'm going to say it anyways, because I think it speaks very clearly to what I want to get across today. There is no Christian apart from church. So let that sit in, and I hope that the message will be a support to that. This is again coming from Hebrews chapter 10, which is what we were looking at last week. And one of the things that I brought out in a very passing sense last week, though you probably do remember the point, is that there is a trend that's happened for a long time in the United States. This is not a new trend. It's not something that just happened, this week. But it's been happening for a number of years, and it's along the lines of, I do not need to go to church. I do not need to be connected with a church. I have a relationship with Jesus. I heard somebody tell me recently that the reason they do not need to be here is Jesus knows who I am, and he knows where I am, and I have a good relationship with him. Well, there are a number of reasons why it's not good reasoning. And there's a number of things that the Bible would say against that kind of idea. And it's a popular idea. And I want to speak to that, or speak against that kind of thinking this morning by going to Hebrews chapter 10 and looking in context at what it is that the Hebrew writer, I believe was Paul, was getting at when he said, do not neglect the assembly. Now again, that wasn't actually the command. In Greek, the imperative is not neglecting the assembly. That's not the imperative. It's let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good works. That's the actual imperative. And then you have a participial phrase, here's my English coming out that I love so much, that supports how you actually fulfill that command. Let us consider how to stir one another up by not neglecting the assembly. That's one of the ways that we fulfill the command, is by not neglecting the assembly. And I want to look in context at why it is that he said that, and I think it will show why Christian assembly is supremely important to living a Christian life. I want to affirm this morning, along with the elders and leaders of this church, that apart from a partnership with a local group of Christians, one cannot lead a godly life, nor can one be called Christian. And so the implications then are, if one chooses not to be connected with a local body and still wears the name Christian, though they don't want anything to do with the local Christians living in the region, you cannot be a biblical Christian if you maintain that kind of thinking. One of the reasons is that nowhere in the New Testament is the name Christian used apart from a collective group. There are no Christians in the New Testament who were not associated or connected in some way with a local group. And there are good reasons for it. And there are probably a lot more than this. This morning or this week, as I've been studying Hebrews chapter 10 for a second week in a row, I saw 3, maybe 4, but I decided to boil it down to 3 reasons why he was getting at the essential nature of the assembly and how that relates to being a Christian, how it relates to acting like a Christian. So there are 3 of them this morning, and I want to get into that. The first one, as I mentioned in passing last week, is that the assembly keeps us spiritually encouraged. And I don't want to put "the" on the front of it with the definite article as though it's, as though we're just talking about this. In Hebrews 10, he says, do not neglect, he says, consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting the assembling of yourselves. Not neglecting the assembling of yourselves. So he's not speaking of Sunday morning at 10 a.m. That's not what he's speaking about. In fact, he goes on to say and to specify exactly what he's speaking about. He said, but encourage one another as you see the day coming close. Some say encourage one another daily. Daily isn't necessarily in the original language, but he's talking about a constant state of encouragement to one another as the day of Jesus is coming. So the example that you have of New Testament Christians is not just Sunday meeting, but they were meeting all the time. In Acts chapter 2, it says that they were gathering in one another's houses day to day. They were doing this daily. It actually uses that word over there in Acts chapter 2. So the idea that he has in mind is Christians getting together and spending a lot of time together. And of course, there is some measure of supremacy to this day, which early Christians called the Lord's Day, but that's simply not the only thing he's talking about. If all we had was one day a week for 1 hour, that wouldn't be enough to do what it is that we're trying to do. The first reason why we're expected to do this is because the assembling of Christians keeps us spiritually encouraged. And again, that comes straight from Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. That's the reasoning he gives. He says, let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting the assembling of yourselves, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Now, this is the first, again, I said I have 3 reasons this morning. The first one, if I had PowerPoint, would be assembling keeps us encouraged. Now, I'm going to give 3 little subpoints there. So these next 3 points are all under that first point. Assembling keeps us encouraged. If you're like me, it's good to have some kind of visual of where we're going and where we are in the message. The first of those subpoints, what do you get out of Hebrews 10, 24 and 25 as it relates to the purpose being to keep us encouraged spiritually? I think there are 3 main things that we get out of it. One of them by implication is, the first one by implication, is that we cannot remain spiritually encouraged if we choose not to meet with other like-minded, spiritually minded, Barnabas-like, Christ-filled people. You cannot maintain spiritual encouragement apart from gathering with people who are intended to be spiritually encouraging. God did not design the kingdom, nor did he design his church to be 1,000 people on 1,000 different islands, struggling in isolation. God did not design the church that way. He designed it to be a body that comes together and functions together and works alongside one another. Specifically in this instance, to give encouragement to one another. And I don't think I'm at all out of line to say that the need for encouragement right now and always is a dire need. Isn't it? There is a virus that has swept across the globe, bringing to a screeching halt commerce, human contact, and normalcy. Not that normalcy in itself is a virtue, but without it, we can get discouraged. And this is not unique to our shores. In fact, in Kingfisher County, relative to a lot of other countries in the world, this is a fair degree closer to normal than some are experiencing right now around the globe. There's need for encouragement in the midst of that. The political right and left in the United States are outdoing one another constantly in slander and political scandals and constant bashing. You turn on the television, this is what you see. There is rising hostilities between world powers. There is an ever-expanding ideological and moral gap between people around the world. And right here in our own assembly, there are those who are wrestling with severe, life-threatening diseases. And there are those who are wrestling day in and day out with sin and fighting against it and potentially becoming discouraged in that. There are parents who have grievances with their children and are trying to get their children to do things that the children aren't wanting to do, and they're dealing with the discouragement that comes with that. There are those whose marriages are secretly in shambles, and they're dealing in private with the discouragement of that. And you go turn on the news, and for the most part, national news, there's not a lot of good that's coming out. And if that's what a person is fed all the time, there is a dire need for encouragement. God understood this. This is not unique to America in 2020. God understood that's the general ways of the world: wars, rumors of wars, famines, plagues, hunger, disease. That's the general goings on of the world as it has always been. And the beautiful design of God to keep us encouraged is that we be able to come together. So one of the implications of this passage is we can't maintain that encouragement apart from this group. We're certainly not going to get it outside of this group. Now, secondly, that second bullet point under that main bullet point is that if God designed, just think about this for a moment. If God designed the assembly to be primarily a place to come be encouraged, if that's how God designed it, then what does that say of the duty of each one of us when we come together as a church? If God made it to be a haven of encouragement when there's discouragement all around, what does that say should be the fundamental activity of the people who are participating? It is to be encouraging. It is the duty of every Christian involved to come and be an encourager. Now, that puts a measure of weight on each person. And you have to be conscientious of that before going into the assembly. What is my attitude that I'm bringing before these people? What is my spirit like? And in this me culture, which is all about me, there is a tendency to think, when I go to this place, what will I get out of it? What is going to be given to me? And if at that point in time I don't feel that I need anything in particular, I don't need to go. Listen, I feel good today. I'm on top of the mountain. I'm not in a valley right now. Listen, if I were down in the valley, I'd be showing up to services, but I don't need that right now. That's a part of the me mentality that is so pervasive and popular in Western society. That is a trend that so many churches are struggling with right now, is people whose whole concept of church is that's a place that you personally go to get what you need. Well, yes, in the whole scheme of things, we do need it. That's what we're talking about. But there may be a day where you're feeling really good. But here's the reality that we have to keep in mind at all times. I guarantee you there's somebody else on any given day who coming into the four walls of this building is not feeling on top of the world. And who or from whom are they going to receive the kind of encouragement that they need to maintain the attitudes in Christ that they need? From whom? If not a Christian, then who else? So it is totally the antonym of the message of the New Testament to say, ask what the church can do for me. We remember John F. Kennedy. What did he say that was so astute? Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Now, that was an amazing statement in itself. But being a Christian is not a ask what the church can do for me kind of thing. Now, ultimately, in your time of need, that's what people are there for. They're going to give what you need. But fundamentally, being a Christian is, what can I do for you? And amazing to me is that there's more filling of self that happens when giving of self than when getting for self and taking from others. That's really the way that it works. It's contrary to the wisdom of the world. But implicit in God's design that the church be an encouragement is that weight is on each one of us. And it's selfish to say that since I don't need anything, I don't need to be there. In reality, you do need it. Everyone needs it. And somebody else needs it as well from you. Third under that, and this first point is admittedly much lengthier than the other two, in case you were anticipating. You all, I saw it. You were calculating. We're only on subpoint 3 of point number 1, and there's 3 altogether, and we've already been going for who knows how long. We're going to be here forever. This is an admittedly longer point because I had more to say about it. But the third subpoint under it is, again, an offshoot of these other first 2. If I come here to be encouraged, and if the duty of me is to come and give encouragement, then implicitly there is no room to come and to grumble. I heard somebody one time say, listen, grumbling is not a talent. Now, some people are really good at it. But it isn't a talent, and it certainly isn't fruit of the Spirit. There are some who that's just where they go. It's just into a state of, if I've got to do something, I'm going to complain. That's how I'm going to see things. I'm going to see it from a complaining standpoint. There's no room for that. Let's be encouragers. And before we move on to the point number 2, I just think this is interesting. The other day, in my family chat, my brother-in-law sent an article from, I believe it was from Science Daily. So this is a secular article, and the intentions of this were not at all to say, go become a Christian. That wasn't the point of it. It was scientific, more of the social sciences and cognitive studies and studies of the brain and psychology and that kind of thing. But whoever was writing the article said that scientists are now seeing, it's like, we knew this all along. Scientists are now seeing that those who are a part of regular religious services are far less likely to have mental disorders and to go on to inflict self-harm, specifically committing suicide. Those who are regular attenders of religious services, so it was very generic. It's not saying Christianity. It's just saying people who try to seek after God and are having that transcendent experience, these people are far less likely for self-harm. To me, that is just an affirmation of what we have known all along. I don't know what I would be or what I would do without the church and the encouragement that I gain here. But this is certainly one of the critical aspects of my mental health, is to have this encouragement and these relationships of like-minded people who are seeking after Christ. So that first main point is that the assembly keeps us encouraged. That's why you must have it to maintain a Christian faith. Secondly, assembling together keeps us from sin. Let me read this. This is Hebrews 10:26, and see if you get this connection. So he says, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. For if we go on sinning after receiving a knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for our sins. Did you notice the connection there between the fight against sin, which is, it is a battle. Ephesians chapter 6, Paul said, don't think you're just wrestling against your own flesh and blood. That's not what's going on here. He says, when you are fighting against the daily struggles of sin, you are waging war against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So he says it's a battle. It is a war. Now, there are no one-man armies that are of any power or of any real effect. But here he says, he makes this connection, not neglecting the meeting together, but encouraging one another. Because if we go on sinning, no longer remains a sacrifice for sins. Did you see the connection he made between those two things? Be encouraging to one another. Don't forsake meeting together, because if you go on sinning when you know the truth, you're going to no longer have a sacrifice for your sins. The connection that he's making is unmistakable. And it's to say that one of your greatest resources in the fight against the flesh is to be gathering together with people to encourage you in your walk. People who are struggling next to you and by your side. People who can hold you accountable. That's primarily what he's getting after. And the implication is that it is easier to be living a life in sin if a person chooses to remove themselves or to greatly distance themselves from the gathering of Christians. That is the implication. And is that news to anyone? Would anybody say, I am stronger as a Christian apart from being around like-minded, spiritually minded, gracious Christians? Or even, would anybody say, I'm equally as strong in my faith when I have nothing to do with other people who share the same faith? I don't know if anybody would say that. And if they did, they probably don't have a good understanding of what sin is. But in my years of ministry, as someone distances themselves from the Lord, it's always because something has taken center view, which is sin. It's not always an overt, going out and getting drunk every night. It's not always an overt like that. They may be living a fairly moral life or whatever, but if if luxuries of life and if family and if activities and if things that I want are the, that may themselves be neutral, fine things to do. But if that's primarily what I spend my time doing, they become an idol. It doesn't matter if they in themselves are not immoral. They can become an idol. And the object of our worship needs to always be Jesus. If he's the object of our worship, we're going to want to be around others. And that's going to fight against sin. Assembling, number 2, keeps us from sin. Doesn't mean that the sin battle will be over, but there will be significantly greater resources to fight against it and to keep us in line. And lastly, this morning, number 3, assembling. And I think this speaks to how the assembly keeps us encouraged and how it helps us to fight against sin. Number 3, assembling together keeps us enlightened. What's the key word? What is the root word in that word enlightened? Light. It's not en or tinned. Light. And I will, in a second, I'm going to read that very word that shows up here in Hebrews chapter 10 in this context. But what's the idea of light? What does light do fundamentally? It shows the way. It makes things visible. It allows us to see what is really there. When I was a kid and I was lying in bed at night and it was dark in the room, my mind could make up a million things of what was out there. You see a tree branch, it's a monster. You see a shadow. I hated my closet door being open because there was one of my dad's suit coats. I had 4 sisters, and so I never got a bathroom growing up. And we had a tiny house, so my closet was my dad's clothes. And the laundry hamper was in my room too. That's besides the point. It's just my grievances. But I could see that. I hated that closet door being open because it looked like somebody standing there. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if I knew what it was. Until the light is on it, I'm not confident. And light lets us see what is actually there. It gives our eyes the ability to see. That's what it is. And this is interesting because he says this, as he's talking about the struggle against sin. Don't go on sinning, because if you do, there no longer remains a sacrifice for your sins. So be together as often as possible. That's the main thing. Christians, be together as often as possible. It doesn't have to be that on Sunday night we're sitting in here. We just need to be together in some way, encouraging one another. But he says this, in the context of all of this, recall the former days when after you were enlightened, there's the word, you endured a hard struggle. Now, is it a certainty that there will be struggles that come our way? Absolutely. Even outside of Christianity, life is a struggle. That's absolute guarantee. There will be struggles for everybody, Christians and non-Christians alike. But he's speaking to these people. He says, remember, just look back and remember how you were able to endure a hard struggle because you had been enlightened. Your eyes were opened to what was really happening. And light brings things into perspective. That's what it does. And having that perspective and having the ability to see made it such that when the struggle came, it was bearable and they were able to endure it. One of the chief things that we do when we come together, and not just us, but pretty much every church around the world, is listen to a message from God's word, which is not unique to America. This or to our current year. This is what Christians have been doing since the earliest days. They came together to hear scriptures read and to hear scriptures expounded on and to hear them explained and to hear them given application to. Because the scriptures, when they are applied, make us enlightened. And being enlightened helps us to endure, and it helps us to keep the proper course. And that's exactly what this passage is doing. We cannot maintain enlightenment apart from hearing the word of God, which is what we do here. Now, as I get ready to close, let me put a warning, because there's always the rebuttal. Well, in 2020, we have computers, and we have audio recordings, and we have television church programs, and we have a number of resources of websites that I can go to at any time I want, and I can gain enlightenment. I can be enlightened because tons of people, Facebook, since this thing has happened, how many people are giving lessons online? How many lessons on Wednesday night? We changed ours to Tuesday night so as to not be in competition with those. Now I'm starting to see Tuesday nights. Sunday, obviously. And then I've seen a number of others who have started daily devotions that they do every single morning. These are Christians that are doing this. So look, we have information absolutely everywhere. And it's possible that somebody could say, I can maintain being enlightened apart from assembling with a local group because I still get what it is that I need from listening online. Where, again, that doesn't allow us, the first 2 points, remember, about the struggle against sin and the need for the support group and being an encouragement to others. It cancels out those in itself. But also, when God designed the church, he designed relationships. Let me ask a couple of prefatory questions. Husbands and wives, would you rather spend an evening in separate locations on FaceTime together? Maybe I shouldn't ask that question. Would you rather spend it on FaceTime or face-to-face? And if the latter is the answer, what is the difference? You still see them. There is something about human contact that cannot be replaced by technology, ever. Best friends. Would you rather get together and go do something together and be together, be side by side together, or get together on a FaceTime call in the middle of the week? Parents, would you rather FaceTime your college students or have them come home for the weekend? Maybe that's also not a good example. Would you rather get together with the church on Zoom or in person? Here's my admonishment this morning. As for different reasons, we're not all assembling together right now, which is understandable. And every person's place of comfort is at a different point right now. Eventually, we will need to get out of our comfort. There is a point in time where we cannot live in fear, and I will stand on that biblically. But in this transitional phase, there are differences, and that's understandable. And there is a matter of shrewdness and prudence for some who choose at this time, for health reasons, not to be here. Understandable. But let the admonishment be this. Let's not get comfortable doing church this way. There is a reason why Paul said, greet one another with a holy kiss. We shouldn't be doing that in COVID-19. I'm still wondering if we should shake hands. I don't know. But why is that command in the Bible? What is it about a holy kiss? Now, in ancient Eastern culture, it really was holy. In 2020, it probably wouldn't be, because that's not our culture. But there's something about human contact. Why is it that Paul in Romans chapter 1 said, I long to be with you Christians so as to impart to you a spiritual gift that is our mutual encouragement of one another? Why couldn't he give that encouragement through a letter? Why did he long to be with them? And it's the same reason why we would rather hang out with a best friend than to watch them on a screen. Zoom for work and for the corporate world? Sure. We would rather have Zoom meetings than be in person because those are not our loved ones. Those are not dear friends, they're coworkers. And we understand that. But let's not ever let services become something that we just check into. Rather, it's something that we give ourselves to. Let's be prayerful and hopeful to see this room filled again and to filled to even greater capacity because of the messages that have been going out all through it. God is with us. And as this message is going to be posted online and as we live in a world that's constantly technologically advancing, I wanted to make that final warning. Not because I have anybody particularly in mind here who isn't longing and prayerful to be back. Everybody I talk to is, really and truly. But the warning should still go there because I think we could fall into it, possibly, and because there are a lot of others who may be watching this who could fall into it as well.